Hi everyone, Sean here from Unicorn Ventures Podcast, and I'm so excited to have you join us today. I used to think that putting my little toe in a stream of water of opportunity when it comes to AI, automation, emerging technologies, and investing would be, a really good experience. And I didn't have any idea the depth of experience that we have. When I reached out to our next guest today, joined by Jordan Green AM. And looking at through the history of experience he has, I realize now it's an ocean of complexity and depth and full of possibility. And I'm so excited to have Jordan Green AM on with us today. Hi, Jordan. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks, Sean. Happy to be here.
Well, you've built three companies. You built companies across three continents. You've worked in Silicon Valley. You pioneered frontier uh, technologies within Australia and abroad. And you've a recipient of the Order of Australia Medal as well. Uh, you set the bar high already. So truth is, I could pretty much start anywhere over the last 40 years of your career, and I'm sure that we'd get an incredible amount of value out of today. But I think I like to start as I usually like to start, right from the very beginning of your journey into leadership and new ways of thinking. And I understand that this may, for you, started in the Boy Scouts.
Uh, it certainly started when I was a kid, in as much as at school and in extracurricular things like Scouts, I always ended up with leadership roles. I was comfortable with them, and people wanted me in them, if that is the right way to say it. Um, Time and again, if I was doing things, people would just automatically look to me and say, "What should we do now?" And I would come up with an answer. So not that I always knew the answer, but it sort of people ask the question. I tried to find an answer, and over time, I also applied myself to learning how to do all of that better. So I didn't just take it for granted. From the time I was about 14, I think I started doing leadership training programs. Uh, in the Scouts and in youth movements and then in university. Uh, so leadership just seemed something that was a good thing to be doing, but it's not an end in and of itself.
Hmm. You were it's amazing how much literature or book or research at a young age can help shape your future. For myself, my early teens, my dad got me a copy of the book How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's over there. And I loved it. And I was exposed to some great mentors when at a young age as well. I wanted to, and going back and thinking about I guess your drive and passion for systems and engineering, was that at a young age as well? Because what was life like at that in your teenage? Where was technology at in Australia?
Uh, okay, well, I mean, I'm the middle of three brothers, all very close in age, and we were always doing things. So we were building, we built go-karts, we built radio-controlled models. So we're always doing things, and we're all very interested. And yes, we did all end up becoming engineers of slightly different types, but very similar. Um, and so we're always oriented that way. Uh, I enjoyed reading a lot of uh, classic science fiction when I was younger, some of which wasn't actually all that classic at the time. Uh, but the thing about it is, it was high quality social comment. It wasn't a lot today. Is just what they call science fantasy. It's just interesting fiction, but a lot of the time, people like Asimov and Van Vogt and Heinlein and a bunch of other authors, uh, they took social and political comment and set it into a different time or a different reality as a way to deal with some of the issues that the world was finding somewhat difficult to confront direct head on. So I found it really interesting and a lot of them were themselves scientists. So the science aspect of what they wrote was robust
Hmm.
and grounded in what was then known of physics and science and engineering and chemistry and stuff. So I was used to having that approach to the world, uh, and I was always very excited about the future and what the future could bring. Uh, and I guess part of the context is that the the post-war phase of life in certainly in Australia, but in most of the certainly the Western world, so the 1950s and 60s, there was an overall atmosphere of great enthusiasm and optimism about what the future will hold and new technology and all sorts of things. And the whole world was imbued with this optimism at the same time that they were literally scared of a nuclear bomb dropping that same day. You get to the 70s and 80s, which is sort of more my time when I was very young, and the world was more carefree. The fear of nuclear war was retreated, not gone, but retreated. Uh, and the sense of optimism had become more a sense of let's just have fun. So, hippies and rock and roll and all sorts of things like that. Um, and then when you get to the 90s, you start to see the birth of the actual technology influence in the world. We start to see computers becoming commonplace. So my first computer was our first computer, I should say, was an Apple II Plus E. So the very, very first Apple personal computer that was available. When we got it, we had to use a tape recorder to load programs. We had a green screen monitor. The tape recorder only lasted about a weekend before we convinced our dad to go out and buy a disk drive. But this is a floppy disk drive with
Yep.
a 5-inch sorry, an 8-inch floppy disk, right?
I remember those. My cousin, he was very much into technology, loved Star Trek, loved, Danger Will Robinson, and his thirst and desire for emerging technologies. He was on the forefront at a very young age. We're the same age, and at the time, we're talking like Commodore 64 was our second computer. I think the Atari 2600 was our first gaming console, but the Commodore 64, I remember it was just mind blowing for me, but he just got the code and I remember the tapes and clunk and so forth. So you had the first Apple.
Yeah, I mean, not the actual first one, but the first model that was out there. I mean, actually, before that, my dad was always interested in technology. Before that, my dad came back from a business trip when I was 12, 13, and he brought us a Magnavox game console, which was pretty much the first game console. It was a box, and you had these cards that you put in and out that created programs, and you had acetate plastic sheets that would stick because of the static to the cathode ray tube of your TV, and the game machine would make symbols and dots and stripes and whatever move around the screen underneath, but the sheet gave you the picture. And then there were two controllers that were all wired together, of course, no wireless activity. Uh, so we've always sort of been delving into that. And then I sort of, I got, when I was thinking about what to do at university, I had two things at the time I was really interested in, robots. And when I say robots, like nothing that exists yet, but
Okay.
the sort of the genuine sort of maybe not sentient, but certainly independent humanoid robot and hovercraft, which were just
Yeah.
fascinating. And I realized that really for either of those, I'd probably have to do multiple degrees. Uh, so I ended up choosing electronics engineering. At the time, I did it at RMIT, which was not yet a university then, which is a good thing. Um, and it was the only place in the country you could get a bachelor's degree in engineering for electronics. Um, and it was fantastic. My all my lecturers were all men, but they were all men who had already spent sort of 10 years in industry, and most of whom still had one foot in industry. In fact, one of my lecturers was 6 months a year he was teaching, and 6 months a year he was in charge of HP's global technology development for control systems.
Wow.
So, which among other things meant that our digital lab had fantastic HP equipment.
Is that why you say it's good that it wasn't a university at the time because you had lecturers, teachers that were in the industry in the moment, just sharing the knowledge and access to direct materials? It wasn't as highly, I don't know, I don't want to use the words governed or politicized, but you know what I mean, the hierarchies
Yeah,
of it all.
it was very much it was much closer to industry in every way. The people who worked there had to have experience and had to continue to engage. The pressure was not about research publications, it was about teaching and research engagement. When it became a university, which only happened because the federal government decided everything should be a university, so they forced the funding through the funding model, they forced everyone to convert, which I think was a big mistake. Our institutes of technology gave us a wonderful opportunity to build strong, what today you would call STEM capabilities and communities that were much more closely aligned and engaged with industry. And they'd grown up doing that. Now, universities struggle to do that because it's not their nature. That's not a criticism, it's a reality.
Mhm.
A lot of the people who taught me uh, shortly after when this happened, they said they didn't want to be professors, and so they left. Right, and that's a great loss. They left that profession, they left that role, they left that institution because they didn't want to be professors. They didn't want to write papers. They didn't want to join the academic treadmill. Uh, anyway, it's history. It's gone now. There's lots of other things going on, but that's certainly what I did.
I think if we're seeing any reincarnation of that, we tend to see them try to emulate it in startup incubators and so forth. But we'll talk a bit about that later on because I know you've had a lot of experiences and some views about how those should actually run as well. Let's fast forward a bit. In the 80s, 90s, you took on frontier technologies that never seen before. You wanted to try something new and be part of something exciting, which led you to Silicon Valley at a really exciting time.
Yeah. So the way that happened is I was running an engineering services company here in Melbourne that I basically co-founded, and one of the things that came up was that the Transport Accident Commission, which is the entity in Victoria that is the government insurer of accidents, traffic accidents. So um, they wanted to get a driving simulator. They actually wanted two. They wanted one as a research platform, which ended up going out to the Monash University Traffic Research Centre. And they wanted one to go in a truck and go around schools all around the state as a driver safety education type tool. And they wanted to have at least three bids for this project. So in the years before that company, I had been involved in the Anzac Ship project in Australia, and that was one of the first major projects in Australia to bring simulation, computer simulation, into the process.
Mhm.
So there was a very small community of people who actually knew about real-time computer simulation, uh, and the TAC had the two main companies in the day in Australia who knew what they were doing already bidding, but they wanted a third. And they'd sort of asked around and they knew that I'd been part of that. So they came to us and said, would you be prepared to bid? So we said, sure. So we did something a bit different. We put together as a small business, so the others were very large. As a small business, we put together a team of small businesses. So we found a company in Silicon Valley who were doing simulation software. They're a startup. We found a consultant in Silicon Valley who was ex-NASA, who knew all about simulation and particularly motion analysis. We found a small startup that was doing 3D audio, and there was one other I can't remember now. But we put together a bid. Um, so well, so here I'll tell you a little bit of a business story as well, just because we're on it.
Please.
So we did all of that, and I went over to the States and I met with all these companies, and we agreed that this was the first of its type in the world, this contract, but it wasn't going to be the last. And whoever won this contract and did a good job had the chance to pick up a lot of work, which appealed to our little cluster of small companies who were all working on the edge. Oh, of course, the other company was the computer platform company, which is a company that still exists, but not in its heyday anymore, a company called Silicon Graphics,
Okay.
um, now officially called SGI. Uh, so we put it all together and we agreed that we'd basically bid pretty much at cost because we wanted to win the project. And as small companies, we actually had the freedom to make that decision for ourselves, whereas the big companies wouldn't do that. They had rules they had to follow. So we ended up putting in a bid. And this is where my business partner here in Melbourne turned out to be a bit of a problem because he had a friend in the government, and he found out that our bid was way lower than anybody else, which meant we were very likely to win. But it also meant that we had lots of headroom. So he arranged with his friend to, and this is after formal tenders had been submitted and the tender box was closed. And for those who don't have any familiarity with that process, it's a very strict, regulated government process. Well, not just government, but in this case, government. And one of the things is once the box is closed, that's it. Bids are bids, and unless you get invited to make a change, you can't change anything. And usually, if they do invite you to make a change, they invite everybody to have the same opportunity. So equity in the process is really important. Uh, so my partner arranged to swap out two or three key pages about pricing and costing from our bid with his mate who is in the department and significantly raise the price and planned that all of that increased raise would just come to our company. And this without my knowledge. But then I found out, and I said, well, number one, you've just committed a literal crime, and I don't want to go to jail. And number
Yeah.
two, you're cheating our partners because you want to take all the money and leave them hurting because they're doing it all at cost. So we had a parting of the ways. A story for another day. But ultimately, that bid did work. And
Your original bid or the revised bid?
well, the revised bid.
Yeah.
It was never disclosed or discovered that
Yeah.
there'd been a change, I guess. And it was difficult because I knew it had happened, but I didn't actually have any evidence because I wasn't part of the process. I didn't even know the name of the person in the government. So there wasn't much I could do about reporting it. Um, but anyway, so that bid was won. Um, and off the back of that and the contacts I'd made in Silicon Valley, I moved to Silicon Valley and joined in the very early stage of the simulation software company. And that's what we built out over the next years.
And
Um,
what was the name of that company?
Corypheus Software.
I wasn't sure how to pronounce it.
Well, Korypheos. It's a Greek word, and so coming from Melbourne, which is the largest Greek city outside Greece, um, I didn't know it, but I'd heard of it before, and the naming was done when the core founder was looking for a name, and he was hunting and hunting and hunting and hunting. He came across this word, and it means either the leader of a choir or the leader of a school of thought. Now, it's great that he put all that time into it, but as happens in America, the company was just known as CSI, which I appreciate these days has another association, but it was Corypheus Software Incorporated.
Right. When you're talking about traffic simulation in Silicon Valley, my mind immediately goes to when I'm on the computer and a little pop-up comes up and says, it's a grid of 9 boxes, and it says, which one's got the stop sign or the green lights or the pedestrian crossing or the bicycles. Is that to train models like AI and automation and assimilation traffic? Is that
No,
what those are?
no, they're all separate things.
Okay.
The capture pop-up you're talking about is just a simple security process, and by saying pick all the pictures with stairs in them,
Yeah.
what they're actually trying to do is make sure that it's not a machine, that it is a human. because machines can't make that kind of choice. Even now, most of the AIs would struggle to make that kind of choice in that environment. Um, so, no. But simulation is, so we used to call it real-time 3D visual simulation.
Hmm.
You might call it virtual reality. So actually, when we started, the term virtual reality hadn't been coined. I quite remember when the very first simulation conference or trade show rather that we went to, where a VR phrased um, device was made, and the industry sort of said, "Oh, what a stupid word! There's no such thing as virtual reality hardware or software." But of course, it's a much catchier phrase, and it caught on, and it ended up being the one that won the day, I guess.
Yeah.
But real time 3D visual simulation. So real time means what you're interacting with, the computer has to respond to in real time, not canned. And so the easiest analogy is to look at games. There are the games where you have to follow a very narrow path through what looks like a very elaborate scene, but you can't access any of that scene. You just follow a very narrow path. So
Sort
the
of like
amount of
Call of Duty
interaction,
or Halo or those kind of
some
games.
some of those, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at in that theme, if you look at a Battlefield, or even actually even Halo, a lot of Halo, you can go roaming all over the landscape. You can
Yeah.
interact with everything. You can bash into things. You can knock things over. It may not be what you're supposed to be doing, but you can do it. You may not win the game if winning is what's important to you, but you can have a lot of fun and go play with everything, right? Uh, so that's full on real time. That wasn't possible in those days outside of a very narrow set of technical circumstances. So that's the real time 3D, just that you actually have a full immersive environment. Again, these days people see it in games all the time, don't think a second thought about it, but it was very hard to do.
Mm.
Uh, and then visual simulation, but it was also audio. So having 3D sound and full on immersive type experience, even to the point that there were headsets and glasses that could be used back in those days. But most of what we did was it all came out of the high end flight simulators, for fighter jets. But we took it to trains and ships and cars and architecture and anywhere that people wanted to be able to interact with a high fidelity model. So one of the projects early on that we got was the Republican Party were going to hold their national convention when they pick who's going to lead them into the next presidential race, right? And they were going to have it down in San Diego, and that's a um, convention that's worth millions and millions of dollars to the city that hosts it. So the city of San Diego really wanted to have it, and they were building a brand new convention center that would be ready in time for that convention. They wanted to have it there. But right at that time, that was a building site. So they needed a way to show the people who were picking where to have this convention how impressive it would be. So they had designs, and in these this is the days when computer-aided design for architecture was sort of starting to become not necessarily the norm, but certainly starting to become common.
So what years are we talking about here, roughly?
Early 90s,
Yeah, okay. So beyond the
early to mid 90s.
MTV Dire Straits, this is technology was moving quite fast at this stage.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it always does.
Yeah.
And so we took on that project. So we took all of their architectural designs and their sort of their visualizations of what they wanted the inside to look like, and we built a comprehensive 3D model of their main convention hall and the externals of the building and the entranceway. So not the entire building, not every room, because they didn't need that. And then they were able to have a walkthrough. Now, here is the difference. With us, that walkthrough could be you and your mouse walking wherever you want. We could have boundaries that you couldn't walk outside, but walking anywhere you want. Whereas some of the other solutions of the day that were more related to the games world, they could make probably a slightly higher resolution or higher quality image, uh, but the walkthrough would be canned. It would be designed. It would take days to render that experience on what we used to call graphic supercomputers.
Hmm.
whereas ours was in real time, right? So we built that for them, and it meant that they could show people this is what it's going to look like in the main auditorium. And oh, don't worry about sitting behind a pillar because look, we can take you to where the pillars are, and there's nobody sitting behind them. So the view is everywhere, and this is the view from the corporate box, and this is the view from the stage. And look, we've decorated all in Republican colors and flags, and they won the convention. Um, so that's what I mean about taking this real-time visual simulation into the whole world of urban planning, as well as training systems for all sorts of vehicles and spaces.
So fast forward, that was the early 90s. We're now 2025 at the end of there. Um, do you feel that we still have gaps in significant gaps in what we're able to create in that space? Or do you feel like we've, really nailed it now?
Well, it's certainly much more impressive. I mean, all you have to do is look at the movies that we see. I mean, I used to go to a whole lot of sort of movies, particularly the animations in the 90s as they came out, or the latest science fiction movies, just to see how the graphics were done.
Mm,
It was actually research, so to speak. I mean, I usually enjoyed the movies, but uh, so yeah. Well, look, there's always gaps. There are always things that could be done better, faster. We're now at the stage where there are people out there using AI to build complete movies, um, which is going to be interesting. None of the AI tools are quite there yet for that, but they're building adaptations and working out, the tricks of the trade to get around the limitations. But as we've seen with deep fakes, the ability to generate audio and video of photorealistic quality is remarkable.
mm.
And as the games show us, the ability to create these immersive environments where you can interact with everything, and these days the characters don't even in the high quality games the characters look like human beings. Their their skin, their eyes, their clothes, the objects they pick up and move around. The dust kicks up and it's a little cloud of dust. It's not obvious little specks of pixelated stuff, right? So yeah, it's very impressive, but you can always do better. Better
With the
now might be more about less compute power, doing it more efficiently rather than changing the actual experience until
Yeah,
we get to immersive holographic capabilities.
that's an area that excites you?
Oh, it's the Star Trek holodeck would be fantastic. Now, the holodeck is different because that's where they actually use light to create solid things, and they somehow have a small space become unlimited. So there are a few tricks there that we need the TARDIS for, um, but still, the ability to create free space, holographic, immersive environments, it would be very exciting. There's a lot of technical challenges before we really get there.
I imagine there'd be a couple. With the company that you joined in Silicon Valley, I understood you had massive growth in a 12-month period. I think I heard 500%. Is that about right?
No, no, no. We were bootstrapped and profitable, and we were growing. We were one of the San Jose Mercury News is the newspaper over there, and we're one of their sort of 50 fastest growing private companies.
Right.
Um, so we were, I guess, we were probably doubling every 6 to 8 months, which isn't hard to do when you come off a low base. I mean, this is the
Yeah.
trick, right? It's a lot harder to sustain in the future. But yes, we were very we were doing really well.
So from your early studies in leadership and then, going through the challenge you did with your business partner at the time and then going to Silicon Valley, what are some thoughts on leadership that you previously held that you've changed your mind on since going through all of that?
Oh, I don't know about change my mind. A leader, so in my view, a leader is somebody who has all the responsibility and accountability. But put it another way, if you think about management, most people think about management as some sort of pyramid, right? Managers up the top and all these people work. But the philosophy of management that lots of people have had and that I sort of adopted early on is actually an inverted pyramid because the job of the manager is to support all the other people, to make it possible for all those other people to do their job in the best and way that they can. That is the job of the manager. Uh, and those who think the job is to sit on high and issue commands and expect everything to happen, it just isn't going to work that way. Now,
Mm.
you get people, a modern day example might be Musk, who act that way, but there's a lot more subtlety to the story. So you have to be careful about that. Uh, but yes, I think it's really. I've always been a values based person. Right? I think people are more important than anything else, and you get results because you have great people doing great things, and you make it possible for them.
Hmm. At the start of your journey, which spans over 4 decades across multiple industries, who is your mentors in the early beginning that helped shape some of those philosophies and values that you have?
Um, yeah, look, there were a few people along the way, I guess, who helped. Certainly, my dad has been a great example of how to be a an authentic and values based business person. Uh, there was a company I worked in where um, the CEO was a very experienced guy and sort of took me under his wing a little bit. And so I got to and again, it's not so much that he taught me, it's that I got to see, right? Good people doing good things in a clever way, and you can see it. Now, sometimes there are people who actually have the added skill of being able to share it, and that's great. But a lot of the time, it was just people I met along the way. I've been lucky that people have taken to me. I
Mm.
remember I was doing one of my first big international sort of road tours, doing things, and I met a guy who said, Jordan, you need to learn how to sell a little bit better. And I was going, well, I'm an engineer, I'm not a salesman, sales. uh, but he sort of said, no, 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 you always have to be able to sell, even if it's just to get the next raise. Right? You're always selling, but selling is not a bad thing. It's a question of how you do it and learning the right skills. And for a lot of what I've done in my life and what I was doing at the time, which was very high value, very complex technology products and solutions, uh, there's a process that's called consultative selling. And there's several key books about it. And this guy said, no, no, you have to learn about consultative selling because it's the sort of thing that you need to do. And he gave me one of the original books in the topic and just said, look, you should read this. Now,
What was that book? Do you remember?
it was called consultative selling, if I remember correctly. Um, I probably have it on my bookshelf somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but this was someone I didn't know for a long time. He just sort of took to me, and he had gone through the same experience. So he was an engineer originally. He had a whole career in big corporate businesses as a sort of salesperson. Well, actually, so in those days, he and I were both called business development when business development actually meant strategic business development, not just as a euphemism for sales.
Yeah.
And that's why consultative selling was this important thing, because consultative selling is an engaged long-term process of creating value. It's not just traditional sales. Um,
Yeah, I
so
think I was explaining when I first entered sales because I was originally from tourism hospitality background, but my first sales role, I was very fortunate to have a general manager, John Freeman, who taught me about the concept of consultative selling. And I guess the way he phrased it to me was you want to be seen as the trusted advisor, someone that comes into the business, understands all the problems, their pain points, and what they're trying to achieve, and help them figure out ways that they can help grow their business, scale it, take it to the next level through your products and service offerings. as well. And for me, that was when it clicked. For me, it's like, yeah, I'm not a salesperson. I'm a part of your business. I'm helping your business grow. I'm developing business. Yeah, it's interesting.
Exactly. And in fact, you go one step further, particularly if you're dealing with large organizations. Your job is to try and help make the person that you're actually dealing with a hero or heroine in their own organization,
100%.
right? Because in big organizations, you need multiple people to make the decision. There's the person who writes the check or signs the check. There's the person who tells the person who signs the check, this is the right thing to buy. There are the people who that person has to talk to and convince or be heard from. So you have this whole constellation of people that you're actually selling to, each one in a different way for a different benefit to them. And the world is made up of humans, not organizations. And so
Mm.
it is business is done person to person. Um, and that's one of the big lessons that a lot of startups don't learn, um, because they think they can do everything sitting behind a computer screen in their living room working through a website. And it can work, but very rarely.
And those big pivotal movements of scale and the breakthroughs, they're not done through an algorithm. Not really. You need partners in that to grow. So when you see founders today, you mentioned someone came to you and said, you need to learn how to sell yourself a bit more. And I guess the knee-jerk reaction of, I don't want to be salesy, but we talked about how you can do that without being salesy. Do you find, I find when I look at founders today, they're getting very good at developing a pitch and knowing the audience and hitting the right points at a higher degree than most business owners that were operating 20, 30 years ago. Is that something that's become an essential tool, do you think, for founders, is to understand their ideal audience, the pain points, and how their products and services align, but also develop it in a compelling way that can attract investment and stakeholders?
Okay, so you sort of touched on a bunch of things there.
Yeah, I
Um,
did.
so understanding your customers, your market, has always been necessary since forever, right? The only path to success. Uh, okay, if you go back to the time of kings and queens when they could do whatever they wanted, that's different. But in terms of business, it's you have to know your customer, you have to understand your market, and you have to be offering something that they perceive as valuable. Valuable means it has to be a benefit they want or hopefully they need, and they're willing to pay your price for it. And if those things aren't in place, then it won't work. So you can have the best mousetrap, the best thing since sliced cheese, but if people don't really feel like it does anything for them, or it's a price that they're just not willing to pay for what it does do, it won't work.
Mm.
So understanding your market, your customers, their buying behavior, the pricing strategy, and being able to sell the benefits. So one of the biggest problems is that a lot of technical founders, and when I say technical, it could be the poodle clipper, all right, who wants to set your business in poodle clipping. It's not just about electronic technologies. Um, Technical founders all too often want to sell you the features because that's what they know, that's what they're familiar with, that's what they're so proud of. They've figured out a better way to clip the toenails on the poodles, and that's great. But customers don't care. What customers care about is the poodle is going to be happier. The clipping is going to be done faster. It's going to be at least no more expensive. And so there's a health benefit for the poodle. There's a time and cost benefit for the person. That's what customers care about, what they get out of it.
And
Far
if
too,
you're living in a house that has hardwood floors, it's going to be a little bit, quieter as well. So you won't hear the click, click, click.
and maybe it means you will be willing to get the poodle's nails clipped more often for that reason,
Yeah.
because now you have higher confidence in the service. So there's a bunch of things. I don't want to try and stretch that metaphor too far, um, but so there is a lot more effort these days put into this communications piece, which overall is a good thing. But it hinges on some uh, very worrying trends and assumptions. So some of the things you referred to is this massive growth in the idea that everybody should start a business, which I think is horrible because being a business builder or entrepreneur is not for everybody by any means. And actually starting a business. So there's two different things. There's a founder and there's an entrepreneur. Well, anyone can be a founder. That just means you started something. An entrepreneur is a business builder. Not every founder is an entrepreneur, and not every entrepreneur is a founder.
Hmm.
But ultimately, for a business to succeed, there has to be someone who starts it, the founder, and there has to be an entrepreneur. Whether one person morphs into the other, or whether you bring other people in to fill the gap. But today we have this thing, particularly with accelerators and stuff, where everyone thinks A, they should be starting a business, and B, the first thing you do with a business is go out and get investment. And so setting aside whether everyone should be starting a business, because there's a whole social demographics issue to discuss there, uh, investment should not be the primary goal of starting a business. Where most of the businesses I started, we didn't get investment. So you
You
only
just
got paid
bootstrapped
if you could generate revenue. So there was a very quick focus, very sharp focus on getting to your customers and selling them something that they were willing to pay for and then growing through that. And it's very doable, but you have to take the risk. So this idea that, oh, no, 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 what you do is you go through a 3 month program, which can do a lot of wonderful things. One of the things I like best about a well-run accelerated program is the discovery phase, where people are forced to go out and speak to 20, 40, 50, 100 prospective customers and actually find out what the customers want and need. So that is a critical part of a well-run accelerator process because it gets founders to actually understand where their initial idea was and what the real world wants. And so that's where you get a lot of the refinement that really brings you towards something that might be possible. But the idea that at the end of this, you've got a great pitch deck and you'll go out and raise money is just ludicrous
it.
because it's not the way to start a company. It can be the way to start a company, but there are a whole lot of reasons why you don't really want to do it that way. For a start, it's a lot easier to raise investment capital if you've already got a running business. Now, that said, I will admit that almost everything that Melbourne Angels, my angel group, invests in is pre-revenue. But not because we have anything against revenue, because we are prepared to take that early stage risk. And we're almost always investing to turn on revenue. So the work's been done, trials have been, pilots have been run, trials have been run. Now it depends. If you're looking at the highly regulated life sciences space, then revenue may be decades away. We don't generally do drug development, although we have got into a few of those. But even with medical devices, it can be a long time before you actually get there. But the beauty is it's a highly regulated pathway, which means that there are objectively recognized by everybody milestones as you get through your regulatory pathway that have a generically accepted uplift on the value of the company, which means the company continues to increase in value and can even be sold before revenue is generated.
Because you've committed to those steps along the way.
Right, you've got through your phase 1 clinical trials with good results. I mean, not just got through them, but you have a positive work for it. So it's not like that if you're trying to develop a consumer app or you're trying to develop software for the enterprise. There is no similarly objective, regulated pathway, but there are well understood what we call value inflection points. So people talk about milestones, and that leads to a whole lot of um, misguided targets along the way. A value inflection point is something that you do that causes the rest of the world to believe your company is more valuable. So value is not something that is on a steady line. It's something where you work for a long time. So, the value of your company stays flat. You work and you work and you work, and you finally do something. You launch something, you add a new feature, you solve a bug, you do something that everybody else says, wow, what you've got is now much better than it was, and your value goes up. and then you get onto a plateau and you work hard and hard and hard, and then you find another one. Sometimes, and later in the life of a company, that might be the number of customers or the scale of revenue when you're working on very financial based metrics. But in the early stages of a company's growth, you're mostly working on strategic value, on the perceived value of the company, not the financial performance of the company. So if you set financial performance milestones very early on, you're probably going to have founders and a company team focusing on the wrong things. Um, so because they'll be trying to push whatever product they've got into the market to generate that revenue without realizing that it's never going to work because that product isn't the right product.
Without the innovation, without the partnerships, without the strategic consideration that it could otherwise take.
So it's really quite a challenge, and whether it's an art or a science is always a debate. But it's quite a challenge to know how to grow an early stage company and how to be an investor in an early stage company. Uh, and there are a whole bunch of assumptions. And this is one of the things I do in my training workshops for angels and founders to talk about what are these underlying assumptions that a lot of people don't talk about. So, for instance, a startup is not the same as starting a small business.
Okay,
A
so walk me
restaurant
through that.
is not a startup. A newsagent, well, not many of those around anymore, but a newsagent is not a startup. A chemist is not a startup. These are conventional small businesses with all of the challenges, but a startup, by the definition, at least in the world of startups as it has been, is that it's a company that will have rapid value growth of the company. So, rule of thumb, it's going to double in value every year for at least the first 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
Now, again, the first year or two probably isn't that hard. You just have to get something right. And in theory, the value will double. But to illustrate it, let's use some numbers. And one of the challenges that we have as early stage investors when founders come to us with overvalued companies. So if you come to early stage investors and you want to raise, I'm going to use really easy numbers, they're not necessarily typical numbers. You want to raise $1 million. And you say, my company is worth $10 million. Well, let's get it right. My company is worth $9 million and I will sell you 10% for $1 million. Right? So after the money goes in, it's worth $10 million. And then you need to double, which means the next year it's got to be $20 million. And the next year it's got to be $40 million. And the next year it's got to be $80 million. Now, it's very hard to imagine what you're going to do to drive that kind of value growth off any real perceived aspect of your business. You do see it happen, of course, particularly in the venture capital investing world, but I'll come back to that.
Okay.
Now, one of the biggest risks, once you start on the path of taking investment, most companies are going to have to take future investment as well. It's rarely a sort of a one and done deal where you just take a bit of money and that's all you ever need. Early stage investors like angels actually quite like those propositions a lot of the time. But when you're having success, it's often, and you've already got investment, it's often worth taking a bit more money to accelerate that success because everything is a window of opportunity. And your chance of succeeding with the formula that you've got, the technology or product or service, customer base, regulatory environment, political setting, economic environment, all the things that make it possible for you to succeed, that's going to change. So once you're being successful, you need to grow as quickly as you can into that success. And that's when often you do need extra capital so you can accelerate your expansion into the success that you're having. It's also a time when you're often very able to find people who want to invest in that. And that would be characterized by that doubling of value. But what if you're not having that much success? So you
Mm.
want a bit more money, not because you're failing, but you're just not having the right rate of success. And people go, okay, I'm willing to give you some more money, but you're overvalued. you maybe buy in at 1 million on nine, and here we are 18 months, 2 years later, and you just haven't been able to perform. But there are all sorts of good reasons and good opportunities, and we do think you can go forward, uh, and you need another $1 million. But we want to give you that $1 million on $4 million. So we're buying 20%.
Hmm.
So that means all the existing shareholders, and potentially including those same investors, are going to take a massive haircut. They're going to go from $10 million to $5 million. They're going to lose half their value in the company, be massively diluted. That's what we call a down round, when you have a valuation that is lower than the valuation at the previous round. And one of the most likely outcomes of a down round is that the founder in charge is no longer in charge.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily fair and reasonable, but that down round is on the record of the business going forward, which means future customers, channel partners, staff, and investors will all see it, and they'll all turn around and go, yeah, but what if that happens again? What if I get affected by that? And no matter what the reason for that was, once you get just a few months into the future from that point, the only thing that really satisfies human beings is to say, oh, don't worry, we've changed the people.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the right answer. It may not be the fault of a person in the company at all, that things didn't go according to plan, but things often don't go according to plan. So overvaluing companies is a real challenge. Now, if on the other hand, you had come and said, I want $1 million on $4 million, so I'm buying 20% at the get-go, then I only have to go from 5 to 10 to 20 to 40, right? And that simple evaluation has a lot to do with the risk profile and the reward profile for everybody involved. And then there's one other thing I'll say about this, and that is that investors are looking to sell their interest in the company in the future to get a return on their investment. So most, in fact, the vast majority, over 85% of all M&A acquisitions, or trade sales as they're called, so selling of the company to another company, happen for less than $80 million.
Okay.
So if your simple doubling takes you past $80 million, you're into a much more rarefied set of opportunities.
5 million or less
Right?
valuation.
Um, so there's a whole lot of features and factors that one has to think about that all interact with each other, whether you're thinking about it from the founder's point of view or the investor's point of view. And one of the things that I'm big on teaching is that what you really want to do is align those interests when you're dealing at the early stage of a company.
If you think about different industries, different business models, you have different multipliers. Who chooses the valuation of a company? Is there
Oh, that's
something that,
easy.
yeah?
It's beauty is in the eye of the beholder. A company is worth whatever an investor thinks it's worth. And if the founder doesn't agree, then you don't take money from that investor. And that's a really important thing. Founders should not take money from an investor if they have a fundamental disagreement about the perception of the company, because that investor is going to be a substantial shareholder, and they're going to be with you if it's an early stage investment. They're going to be with you for a long time. And that's going to be a very difficult relationship if you really just don't see the world the same way at all.
So you've been, I think it's 20 years next year, Melbourne Angels
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
in
The
August,
year after,
or
19
the
years,
year after.
2007. Yep.
Oh, okay. And you've been a judge many times over, and you've operated in this space for a long, long time. Um, what is the biggest mindset or problem between founders and investors that you see popping up more often than not that causes the biggest tension later on?
Uh,
Or
well,
we can
let
inverse
me let
that.
me
What
put
do you
it.
think needs to be right?
Let me put it this way. It's what I was just saying, that you have to you have to understand each other. So I think one of the biggest mistakes is that too many founders think that investors are just money. Now, a lot of founders go, "Oh, I want smart money. I want people who can help me." But it's one thing to say that, and another thing to actually mean that. And I
Mhm.
don't mean that people are lying. There are definitely people out there who lie, and you try very hard to avoid those. Uh, but a lot of people just don't have any idea what it means because they haven't been on that journey before. So let me ask you, what is the average age of a startup founder in Australia?
I think that most people would think it would be 23 to 30s. So let's say 25, 26. But I feel that it might be older because I think that it's only through experience where some people see where the problems arise, the real problems that could be significantly changed if they could lay on their own experience and flavor. So I'm going to say 32.
So the last research that I've seen in Australia, the average age of a startup founder is 42.
42.
In the
Okay,
United States, 47,
great.
or maybe it was 45. I can't quite remember. My point is that yes, a lot of startups are started by people who have life experience, who have industry experience, who have lived the pain point they're trying to solve and have now decided there's a way to solve it.
Mm,
The trend is probably coming down a little bit because of this issue that there are more people than jobs. And so there are a lot of people in their, now probably in their sort of late 30s who have already had a corporate career or a business career who are now feeling it's time to jump out and do something on their own. A lot of those start as so-called side hustles. Uh, but on the other hand, the 20 somethings who start a business, one of the attractive things about them, one of the reasons why most of the really big successes, not all, but most of the really big successes, the disruptive breakout successes, were started by 20 somethings. It's because they don't know what they're supposed to not be able to do.
yeah.
And so, not having perceived barriers, they go and do things that the establishment has sort of put a fence around and said that's not possible. Now, uh, I hate to use this as an example because it was started by criminals, but Uber is an example of doing something that the world just didn't think was possible.
Mhm.
Right? Taxis were taxis. Everybody doesn't want to be a taxi. Although, if you'd ever gone to Russia, you would know that that's exactly what everybody does and has done for decades. Uh, so, and I don't know that Uber was inspired by Russia. I'm not saying that. Um, but disruptive is sort of the holy grail. So again, when I take people through the workshops, I talk to them about the different types of business you can build, where you can build a business because you've discovered something. That's the invent or a technology driven opportunity. The problem with that is you're a solution looking for a problem to solve. So that's not a great way to go. You can have a problem that you see needs to be solved and you come up with a solution that's a better solution than anything that's out there. And that's okay. That's incremental innovation, and you can make a good business out of that. There are low barriers to entry because the market already understands the problem. People are already paying for a solution. You just have to convince them that your solution is a better choice than anything else. And that's most conventional businesses, right? That's how they enter the market. That's how they change the market. That's how they try and stay in the market. And then you get the disruptor, somebody who is solving a problem that nobody expected could be solved. They're the unmet need. That's the holy grail of startup success, because that's what takes you from zero to hero in a very short time frame. And that's very hard because most of those, as in 90 something percent of those, will fail because they're extreme. You're trying to do a really big pivot, or not pivot, change, a really big growth. You're trying to change behavior. You're trying to
Yeah.
change societal expectations. You're trying to change community norms.
Beliefs. Mhm.
And it's also worth recognizing for all those people who go through business school that first mover advantage is most of the time not an advantage at all. Because when you're the first in market with something, you have to educate the market, you have to educate the channels, you have to educate the customers, you have to meet whatever the regulatory requirements are, you have to change policies. you have to change everything. So unless what you've got is super compelling, you're going to struggle and you're going to need a lot of money to do all that stuff because you're not making money yet. The fast follower is going to eat your breakfast. And the example for that is Apple. Apple has never been first at anything significant. The one thing that they were absolutely first at was delivering a digital personal assistant, a thing called the Apple Newton, which is a complete flop.
Hmm.
Every piece of significant technology in the Apple Newton ended up in other digital assistants. So the technology was fantastic. But Apple became the most valuable company in the world by being a very successful follower. The iPhone was not the first smartphone in the marketplace. The iPod was not the first MP3 player in the marketplace, right? The the Mac was not the first personal computer in the marketplace. So they've done a remarkable job of finding a positioning and a strategy to build a very successful business without first mover advantage.
Just wanted to say, John, would that be the same as Microsoft as well? I heard that they weren't the first innovators, but they were seeing ideas or acquiring companies and bringing them in very quickly.
Oh, well, I mean, Microsoft's a slightly different story. So, in some ways, they were a first mover, um, but they joined a wave of first movers. So, the thing that really launched Microsoft was a very, very clever and fortuitous deal that Bill Gates did when they were first starting out to get IBM to put the Microsoft operating system on the IBM PC. And that really sort of sealed the deal in terms of establishing Microsoft and growing from there. The other thing, of course, was that Bill Gates is quite literally one of the smartest people in the world, and he was both very technical and very capable. So Bill Gates, Larry Ellison, people like that are those rare exceptions where you go from being founder to CEO of a global dominating company because you're able to learn and adapt to each of the different demands as that grows. Uh, it didn't happen with Apple because Steve Jobs wasn't able to do that. And so he got fired. He came back with new experience and was able to take the company to great heights. No, taking away from what he achieved. But a lot of other companies, what you'll see is they've had different leaders over the journey. Uh, and these days, there's sort of an expectation, even a demand that the founders stay in charge of a company. But look at Google. The founders of Google became understudies to Eric Schmidt, their CEO, from the earliest days. And it was only 25 years after they started the company that one of the founders became CEO,
Yeah.
right? Zuckerberg did not actually lead Facebook to great success. That was Sheryl Sanders as CEO. So it's important for everyone to recognize this. There are lots of good self aware founders who know that what they love is the cut and thrust of building a new venture. And when you get to that process, that part where you're doing $100 million a year in revenue, especially if you've grown quickly, that could be just a few years down the track, and you suddenly pop your head up and go, but I don't want to worry about processes and HR regulations and cash flow management, and I don't want to worry about all of that. I want to get back and do that cut and thrust. So that's when those people either change out their role. So if they're a very technical person, that's when you'll often see them shift over to being the chief technology officer, or they step aside and they go get involved in starting other companies.
Hmm.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's the right decision for everybody. I mean, if it's the right decision, it's the right decision for everybody, and the shareholders and investors should be very happy with it too.
One of the questions I was going to ask you were, what are some of the distinguishing factors between a founder and an entrepreneur? Understand they could be the same person, but I think you summed that up really well. In the past, you have talked about honesty, integrity being non-negotiables. When assessing the thousands of different, I guess, pitches that have crossed your desk and so forth, or hearing from others, is there any early signals that tells you a founder isn't necessarily ready for the journey?
Uh, Well, I mean, there's always the chance that you'll get an obvious signal, as in, um, so a couple that are pretty sort of blatant is when you catch people lying to you and you make it clear that you know they're lying to you and they don't care,
Oh,
right?
well.
So because they know they're lying intentionally. So that's sort of, for me, that's absolutely a red flag. I won't invest in somebody who's a liar. Uh, and part of the reason for that is because I've lost a lot of money with people who are liars. Um,
Mhm.
well, not a lot of money, but enough to have learnt the lesson. I mean, one of the beauties about the angel game is you don't have to lose all the money yourself, but if you work with other experienced angels, then collectively you've lost or spent or invested, if you will, in learning millions of dollars to learn things, and then you share them. Uh, so and so one aspect is lying. Another aspect is control. If founders are just completely focused how they have to have absolute control over everything, well, then there are not many things that succeed with a control freak in charge. There are things that are successful and have a control freak in charge,
Mhm.
but that's rarely how they got there. Uh, but those are obvious things, and there are shades of grey. So there are founders who don't realize they're lying to you because they don't think of it as lying. They just don't think they're telling you everything that you want to know, because you don't need to know that thing.
So
I'll
they're
give you a
not
classic
being
example.
malicious, they're just being selective.
Right. It's the old white lie idea, or not even
Mhm.
a lie. It's an omission.
Yeah.
A simple example: we were on the verge of investing in a very promising looking business, a brother and sister team, and we almost completed due diligence, and suddenly the brother started asking for changes in the terms of the investment, and I sort of said, okay, well, where's this coming from? Oh, I decided that this is what we want. And it didn't make sense. It just wasn't him. And so I asked again, where is this coming from? Obviously, you're getting advice from somebody. I'd like to know who's advising you because we'd like to know who we're negotiating with, who we're dealing with.
Mhm.
Uh, there's a whole long story, but basically it came down to fairly quickly, just a few interactions. We were sitting down in a cafe, the brother and the sister and myself, and I asked the question again, and the sister was looking very uncomfortable, and the brother got very angry with me and said, "Well, it's an uncle of mine, but you have no right to ask. You don't need to know. I'm not telling you his name. You're just intruding." I said, "Well,
It's just asking question.
if that's the way you feel, that's fine, but I'm not interested anymore."
Mhm.
And he said, "What?" I said, "Well, you're right. You can have your uncle advise you, but I can't work with an invisible person behind the curtain. That's not how relationships are built. And this is a relationship. So that's fine. You do what your uncle advises you to do. He's a successful businessman. I'm sure he knows what he's talking about, but that's not the right one for me." This is important. Most of the time, when we're saying no to startups, it's not because they're bad. Sure, there are some that seem like a completely stupid idea that'll never work, but most of the time, it's just because it's not a good fit between the investor and the startup, between the investor and the founder, or the market, or the technology, or the business model, or the preparation or lack thereof, but also whether the investor actually knows what they're doing. So, one of the key things here, the question that you asked, is a question that founders have to ask themselves. How do I know if this is the investor I want to work with? What are the
Mhm.
signals I should be looking for? So, I always say if an investor can't explain to a founder exactly why the terms of investment that they want are going to be good for everybody, why they align the interests of the founder and the investor towards the future shared success, then I'm not sure the founder should be trusting that investor. Right? So it goes both ways. The greatest success comes from a well-aligned investment because people are going to work together. The principle of startup investing. So when I was in Silicon Valley and I got to know venture capital, and I talking to all these tier one venture capital guys, and the standard mantra, back in the 90s, which is the heyday of venture capital, was that I want to invest to change the world. And angel investing is pretty much the same thing. For me personally, I add the caveat that I don't mind if it's going to change the world in just a small way, but I want
Mm.
it to change the world. I want it to change the world for the better.
For the better. Yeah.
And that's where the value judgment starts to come in. So I have not invested in any of the apps that make it easier for you to buy a cup of coffee from your local cafe because I just didn't see how it was going to make the world a better place. Now, I don't drink coffee, so I don't feel the pain.
That's the
Um,
reason.
um, but it's also because none of them have succeeded. And
Mm.
that was seemed pretty obvious because none of them were solving a big enough problem. They were solving a tiny little problem for a bunch of people that was never going to be sustainable. So finding what works and being able to explain why you think what works. The other thing from that's been learnt from the venture capital world, which again was restated by one of the top performing VCs just recently, is that an enormous part of being a successful venture capital investor and is being pattern matching, right? Knowing what works, having experienced what works, having seen what works, having seen what makes a good founder, what makes a bad founder, and looking for that same pattern. It's not perfect and it's not 100% scientific, but it's got a lot more to do with it than any algorithmically driven investment strategy is ever going to be able to replicate.
Mm.
Uh, so there are these human elements. Uh, so I came back from Silicon Valley and started a venture capital fund here, one of the first successful funds, because I came back with the idea that venture capital was all about having people who had enough experience, enough knowledge to help companies, other startup companies succeed, and had the skills to communicate what they had learned and what they could see in a way that was effective. And the money is just the grease to the wheels. It's those abilities, that experience, that insight, the networks, and those skills. Those are the things that are actually valuable. And that's the same basic strategy with angel investing, well, certainly with organized angel investing. So the definition we use of an angel investor is a private person who invests their own money and their own time. So their financial capital and their intellectual capital. And for me, if you can't invest your intellectual capital, you shouldn't be investing because it's a crazy bet to put money on a startup. You get better odds at this casino, right? So if you're going to do it, there has to be a reason to do it. Think about it this way. Every single startup that you invest in should be one that you have a deeply held conviction is going to be a huge success. And yet, we know that at least half of everything we invest in is going to be a complete loss. So there are those
Right.
two things. If you only invest in the things that you, excuse me, that you believe are going to be a huge success, have an excellent chance of being a huge success, but half of everything you invest in, you're going to lose your money. Why would you ever invest in something that's just so, right?
You'd
It,
really have to believe in it.
it doesn't make sense to do it that way. A lot of people are doing it that way today. They say to me, Jordan, you're working too hard. You just got to spread the money around. That speaks to wealth. Most angel investors are not super wealthy people. Most super wealthy people don't invest in startups, although it's become quite fashionable to do it these days. But the truth is, most of them don't because the amount of money you invest in a startup is too small for somebody with a large wealth base to spend time managing. The same reason very large funds don't invest in early stage companies. That's why, when Sequoia became a $1 billion fund, everybody in Silicon Valley stopped calling them a venture capital firm because they're too big to do venture capital. One of my friends I think he still is a senior partner at Kleiner Perkins, and they were raising a fund some years ago now. They only wanted to raise $650 million. Sorry, they only wanted to raise half a million dollars. No, $500 million. They raised 650 because of pressure from their investors who wanted to get in, but they were very concerned because it's very hard to make returns on a fund that size when you invest at the very early stage. Most recently, Tim Draper, the single most successful venture capitalist still operating today, his funds are $200 million because he invests at the earliest stages of a venture, right?
Mm.
He could raise $2 billion, right? He's a remarkable individual, but with a fantastic track record. And he's the third generation of a venture capital dynasty, which is also a pretty unusual thing. And his kids are in the game now too. Um, but the thing is, he raises $200 million because if you do it right, you can make great returns on $200 million. But the more money you have to put to work, the bigger the return has to be. And that's a
Yeah,
real
thinking about that
challenge.
multiplier doubling every year for the first 5 years, and yeah.
Well, and that's the same thing for the companies, right? The more money you take on as investment, the bigger your exit has to be. The bigger your exit has to be, the bigger the performance of your company has to be. The bigger the performance of your company has to be, the longer it's going to take you to get there. So there are companies like Canva who are, I've lost track, but they're doing somewhere between, I think, 1.5 and $2 billion a year in revenue now and profitable, but they're valued at something like $55 billion. No company, and if that company was going to be sold for a multiple, right? So even just two, it would be over $100 billion. No company in the history of the world has ever been sold for that much money. So the
Mm.
only option is to list on an exchange, which is what they're doing now, and they're transferring the company to the United States and doing it over there. Um, so that is a company that is valued entirely on the hype of investment. They their claim, I don't know if it's true, but the claim they made a few years ago was that every round of venture capital that they took on after the first round, they didn't need the money, but they were able to raise it and they were able to hype their valuation. So they took on a bunch of money that got their valuation up to stratospheric heights very quickly, or because they were able to convince investors, later stage VC style investors and large family office style investors, people with lots of money to play with, that the company is worth more now than it was before, and you can only buy a small share of it.
Geez,
Now,
like even if they raised that and just put it in a bank and lived off the interest, like
well, they put that money in the bank, and
yeah.
I mean, ultimately, I assume they did use it to run the business, but their claim was they didn't need most of it
Mhm.
because they were living off their revenue. So that's great. On the other hand, there's a company right here in Melbourne that most people don't know about called Blackmagic Design. Private, never took any outside investment, built from scratch, um, does over $2 billion a year in revenue and profitable, and is the world leader in the provision of a range of specialized technologies for aspects of making movies. Um, and they're sort of one of the hidden heroes. There's a bunch of companies like this in Australia that people don't think about. Um, Now, they never took any money. So if they choose to list, which they keep resisting, which I think is a really good idea because listing is not a great model, but they could list at any price they want because nobody knows what they're worth because they haven't ever taken any. So they would be valued, no, at the very least, they would be valued on their financial performance.
Mhm.
When you want to sell a company to another company, a trade sale, as opposed to a listing on an exchange, then there are two basic types of exit, what we call financial value exit and strategic value exit. The financial value exit is when you just get sold on a multiple of your revenue or your profit, which means if you want a big exit, you have to have very big revenue or profit. And it means the acquirer is going to say, well, you've had, your last 3 years of profit have been this. I'll buy the next 3 years of profit with this discount for the things I'm concerned about. And they're still doing it because they think in their own hands they can probably do better than you've been doing, but they're
Mhm.
basically buying on your past performance. So they're going to want to take some protection, some risk mitigation in doing that. A strategic value exit is when they look at you and they go, what you've got, your technology, your customers, your market position, your regulatory approval, the aspects of your business in are valuable to me. I'm a much bigger company. I don't really care about your revenue or profit directly because I believe with what you've got in my hands, I could make, five, 10 times what you're making over the next 2 or 3 years. So now a strategic value exit is when people are buying it for what they perceive as a strategic value. And that means they're betting on themselves for their future. And people always bet bigger on themselves than they do on other people.
Yeah.
So there is some basic underlying psychology, all the way back. You asked me about leadership. A lot of leadership is understanding people and trying to work with people, not force them, but make them think that, in one sense, that they want to do what they're going to do. You talked about business development, strategic partnerships earlier on. When I worked in the Valley and with Silicon Graphics as our computer platform, there were people at Silicon Graphics, which was a very big company in those days, who thought I worked for them. They saw me in their hallways all the time. I would be at their meetings. I would be on their stands at trade shows. They just literally thought I worked for them. They weren't sure where, but they assumed I worked for them because we were very close partners and I did everything I could to help them. And sure, as a result, they did everything they could to help me, but it wasn't a transaction. I did it because that's the right way to treat the people you work with. The result is, and they were a very values driven company in a lot of ways. Their international business was run by an Australian, which had a lot to do with their international success. Because certainly back then, Americans were not particularly good overall at doing business outside America. They thought business done outside America, it still had to be done the American way.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a few of the things that we've talked about. I guess I just trying to bring them back into focus.
Oh, I love it. There's something you said a little bit earlier on, which I don't know if it struck something in me, but it was talking about you don't need to lose millions to learn the lesson. And part of the advantage of Angel Network is that you can learn from each other and so forth. Can you tell me I have a two-part question. I don't want to lose the other question. I'm at risk of that, which is what do you see commonly people are trying to raise money for in their business? But I'd also like you to tell us about how angel investment networks work, because I would see them almost as everyone's competing for the next best idea. I should be your investor, but I suspect that there's something different to that. And I do love how you talked about the investor matching and what's the value that the investor is going to be
Okay.
able to bring into that. So I'll leave that. There you go.
So let me tell you about angel groups. Right. So these days, angel has become a somewhat abused term, as always happens with jargon, and it's now sort of used generically to mean almost any person investing in a company or any early stage investment in a company, and so there's a lot of confusion. So angel describes the investor, not the stage of investment. An angel group is almost always a non-profit entity where it's a club, right? In Australia, they're mostly incorporated associations, just like the local cricket club or tennis club or ladies knitting club or whatever.
Mhm.
Uh, so the the purpose of the group is to provide a cooperative, collaborative collective where people can come together with this common interest of finding opportunities to invest in startups and build a portfolio of them. So there are three key things you get when you join an angel group. The first is the ability to diversify by volume. So any investment strategy, stocks, property, whatever, the primary risk mitigation strategy is make a lot of bets. Okay.
Mhm.
So most of us do not have millions and millions and millions of dollars at all. And we certainly don't have that to put into startup investments. And if you're doing it on your own, you'll have to make much larger investments in each company, which means you can make fewer investments from a financial point of view. But it also means you won't have the time to work on each of your investments. So you join a group, You can do a lot more investments with a smaller amount per investment, and that allows you to get a bigger portfolio faster. And that means you get this primary risk mitigation strategy of diversification by volume. The second primary risk mitigation strategy of any investment portfolio is what they call diversification. So investing in complementary things, in residential property and commercial property, in regular shares and options or futures.
Mm.
Uh, or so when you join an angel group, because you end up working with a group of other people with whom you have trust and collaboration, you can invest in things you would not invest in on your own. All of us, by our it's human nature that if you go out there to start trying to invest in things, you'll only invest in things you know and understand. It's very rare that someone says, "Oh my gosh, I'm a coder and I'm going to invest in a cure for cancer." It happens, particularly with a cure for cancer, because people get emotional about what if it really did work, but they probably don't understand anything about technology, the process, the product development, the industry, the market opportunity, or the exits. So most people don't invest outside what they know,
Mhm.
but you need to, particularly when you're doing early stage investing, and particularly when you're doing it in a small market like Australia. You can't afford to be niched. If you're in Silicon Valley, you can choose to invest only, excuse me, only in you know uh, social gaming on the Meta platform. You can choose a terribly narrow niche. I only want to invest in um, AI companies producing solutions for accounting enterprise clients, right? You can pick very narrow niches because of the scale of the market at every stage. But when you're outside places like that, and there are only a few places like that on the face of the planet, you have to take a slightly different strategy. And in the case of Australia, you take a strategy to diversify in some way. And to do that, you need people who know how to do that. So when I'm in an angel group and something comes along from a sector that I don't really understand, but there's somebody in the group who I know has experience in that sector and they say that's a really good deal, I can say, well, if, Sean, since you think it's a good deal and we're doing this together and we're in lots of deals together, I'm going to trust your judgment and I'm going to place a bet on this opportunity. But I have a reason to do that now because I know who you are and I know what you're saying, and you've been able to explain to me why you think it's a good deal. So, second primary risk mitigation strategy and benefit of an angel group, diversification. The
Mhm.
third primary benefit of joining an angel group is something that there is no other way that anyone's ever been able to explain to me you can do, and that is you get time. So, the process of investing in startups is no matter how you do it, even the cowboys spend a lot more time at the front end looking for and filtering opportunities than you do at the back end getting exits. So that time is difficult. And for most people, that front end process eventually just starts to feel a bit too laborious or frustrating because you're mostly looking at lots and lots of things and saying no almost all the time.
Mm.
But when you're in a group, everybody does the work. And as a result, you get to borrow everybody else's time. And when you move on to the ones you have invested in, again, I can't be the person adding my intellectual capital, adding my help to every single company in my portfolio. 50 plus companies, and I can't work. If I work with all of them for 1 hour a week, that's a full-time job.
More,
So
yeah.
it's very challenging. But if other members of the angel group are responsible for other companies in the portfolio, suddenly many hands make light work. So those are sort of the three primary benefits, but they're predicated on the idea that it's this, you know, uh, uh, cooperative, collaborative, collective, where the members do most of the work. Now, not every angel group works that way. There are some angel groups that employ people to do all that front end work. There are some angel groups that are really not groups; they're just a network of a list of people. And when you go to online syndication platforms, that's what you're looking at. You're looking at a platform that simply has a long list of people who might be investors, There's no group process. It's all an arm's length transactional process. So, and there's the whole spectrum of how these things can be done. But in Australia, the vast majority of angel groups are what we call member-led groups, where the members do the work. That's pretty much true in New Zealand and in US and Canada and Scotland, um, and maybe half the market in Europe are like that. And the others are what we call manager led, where there are professional staff doing a lot of the work, running a lot of the process. The investors will probably still make their own decisions. Angel groups or angel networks are typically not funds. Each member is making their own individual decision on each individual deal, not negotiating separate terms. One negotiation of investment terms by the group or by the lead
Oh, okay.
investor. If you run into the situation where you've got multiple investors all trying to negotiate terms with a founder, then that's going to be a mess.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't happen that way. It certainly shouldn't happen that way from within a group of investors. If somebody within a group of investors goes out and starts trying to negotiate with the founder separately, that's a break of faith with the group, and it's a frustration for the founder. And often the founders don't know what to do. And I've had that happen. I had one deal which was looking really, really good, but a relatively new member of the group who had learned how to do everything in the sort of the investment banking world, which is a sort of kill and be killed type mentality, and very transactional. He'd gone to the founder and said, "Oh, look, I think you got a great deal, and I know I'm a member of the Angels, but I think the Angel process is taking too long. How about I've got these mates on in this case it was in Melbourne, so it was on Collins Street, but it could be George Street in Sydney, I guess, or wherever,
Yeah.
or Pitt Street, and I'm sure they'll put the money up. Let's just go and do it." And the founder called me up and said, "What am I supposed to do?" I said, "Well, you have to decide. You have to decide. It's your company. I can't tell you what to do. What I can tell you is we're serious about what we're doing, about our offer, and we intend to invest. But if you want to take this money in the hand rather than wait for us, I can completely understand why you would decide to do that. Uh, but you have to decide." And
I
he
can't
did
believe
just,
they actually did that.
well, what, that he called and asked me, or that the other
No,
guy
no,
tried to
that
hijack the
the guy
deal?
tried to, the banker tried to cut you out or do a side deal.
Well, but that's how other types of business transactions are done all the
Yeah.
time. Like people see it as competitive. So you said everyone's competing for the deal. No, the vast majority of angel investors and certainly in the angel group world, the vast majority of people do not see it as a competition. If it's a really good deal, what you want to do is share it with people.
Yeah.
So
And lean on each other, as you said, for that time and skills and experience and everything else. So,
so when you look at it this way, again, just to borrow from the Silicon Valley experience, you very rarely hear that some big name, so Kleiner Perkins I used before, you very rarely hear that Kleiner Perkins invested in this deal. What you hear is Kleiner Perkins led the investment in this deal, along with these two, three, four, five other very big investment firms. And that usually isn't because the lead investor couldn't find the money to do that deal all on their own. It's because it's a bad strategy. You spread the risk. You want to do, remember what I said before, you want to do more deals with the money
yeah,
that you've got. You want to
because
place
you're
more
going to
bets.
probably lose half of it anyway. So, yeah,
Uh, and you want to get, as you said, you want to get access to the brains, the networks, the insights from all those other investors who are going to be sitting at the table. And then the third thing is that when you have a company who's raising money, the easiest way to raise money in the future is to raise it from your existing shareholders. Just like it's the easiest way to get new sales is to find a way to get more money from your existing customers.
yeah.
All right. So this model of syndicating investments is a well proven strategy. And so what happens with angel groups is that when we find a deal, so at Melbourne Angels, when we find a deal that we're leading, because that we're choosing to lead because we have so much confidence in it, we make sure that we make room in the round for others, and we share it with the other angel groups, around Australia, New Zealand, and overseas, um, because that's a better strategy for everybody.
So
Um,
how many people would you have in your network of Melbourne Angels now?
so that's a good question. I've handed over the running of the group some years ago now, so I actually don't keep my finger on that, but it's close to 100.
Hmm.
Um, I always wanted it actually to be like three or 400, but we never sort of got there for some weird reasons about Australia. But um, it's sort of hovered around the 100 mark. The other big angel groups in Australia are pretty much a similar size.
Mm.
Um,
And one of the things I love, in talking with you and looking what you've done is you network and work well with other investor groups, in Canada and overseas, as well as Australia, um, and letting people take advantage of those opportunities as well. How important to you, how important is that to you to be able to spread the word of this opportunity?
well, so I mean, for me personally, there are a lot of reasons I do it that I think are valuable, not the least of which is to promote the success of Australia and the smartness of Australia, so that the rest of the world and frankly the rest of Australia will pick up and see, stop cringing and thinking we're somehow behind or punching above our weight. I mean, Australia invented one of the first three digital computers in the world,
Oh, I
right?
didn't know
We
that.
were we a computer called CIRAC. It's the only one of the original digital computers that still exists. It doesn't still work, but it still exists. It was the first computer in the world to play digital music. Um, it was the first computer in the world to provide sustained 24-hour meteorological forecasting. I mean, we did a whole lot of things, and we continue throughout, have always done a whole lot of things. The first global computer company was an Australian company in 19 teens, 19 sort of 18, I think it was.
Wow.
The company started selling first a mechanical and then an electromechanical computer. Uh, in classic fashion, it was a totalizer. It was a betting machine sold to horse racing all around the world. Um, but that was, as far as I've been able to find out, that was the first international computer company, and that was right here in Australia. So Australia, so I have this passion that people should stop cringing and stop thinking that we're behind, we're unable, and start reaching for the sky because we've been doing it all along. But we pay more attention to a football player than we do to a successful achievement in this space. Um, so that's one reason for doing it. Um, and I guess the other reason is what I said before, that uh, syndicating the deals goes both ways. Um, so you get the opportunities you share mean that people share opportunities with you, and you to share opportunities to invest together, you need to build relationships. It doesn't happen out of the blue. So unlike the online syndication platforms where random groups of people co-invest in deals, but they never really know each other, there's nothing wrong with that. But that's not this. This is
Hmm.
about building relationships. And then the other reason for syndication, particularly say in the case of Australian companies, is one of the ways I launched this relationship early in the United States. So I went to all my friends at angel groups in the United States. I said, we've got a lot of companies that want to come into the US, and you're going to have the right networks. You know which doors to open. You've worked in the companies that could be their customers. And initially, I just said, I'd just appreciate it if, when one of these comes along, if you'd be willing to take a look, and if you can make an introduction or something, I'd appreciate your help. And they said yes. Didn't ask them to invest. Just asked them to help me based on our relationship, help a company. And then of course they go, oh, that's actually quite an interesting company. And can we invest in that? And then you have the added benefit that most Australian startups, at least they used to be, I think we've got too Americanized to still have this, but it used to be that most Australian startups did a lot more with a lot less.
Hmm.
So when they got to the US market, investors in the US said, my God, look at what you've achieved. And you haven't had, $10 million invested. So there's a great opportunity to invest in the growth of that company. So we were able to build benefit for our portfolio companies by building relationships through syndication of deals. So all these things tie together. It's not one on its own.
Yeah, I love that. You taught me so much about the networks, and I know we're only, as I said, started off in the beginning of just dipping my toe in the water, but we're scratching the surface and of this whole community of networks I didn't even know existed, to be honest, 12 months ago. So thank you so much for your time. I wanted to ask about for the potential founders and entrepreneurs out there, you host a series of workshops.
Sure. So I've developed a an Australian group of workshops for training, primarily for training startup investors, but we inherently invite founders and anyone else who's interested. So over the years, I've had government economic development people, university tech transfer people, and commercialization people, lawyers and accountants and other sorts of advisors, uh, but certainly investors and founders. We typically have at least 30% of the room are founders because if everybody can learn how early stage investment works, there'll be less misunderstanding, there'll be less misconceptions, expectations are better aligned, which means things can happen faster and with less friction and benefit everybody. And the difference is there are lots of places you can go to get taught about how to get investment ready, and each has its agenda. You can go to the accountants and they want you to be their client. You can go to the accelerators, and for the most part, they're taking equity in your business. And for some of the more egregious ones, the money they give you for that equity, they make you pay back to them for fees, which is not a good look. And then for some of the really good ones, like the universities, they usually don't take equity in the business, which is actually a really good model. Um, but anyway, the point is, all these different people, you can go to sort of business development people, business planning people, they mostly want you to become their client. When you come to angel investors, our only agenda is that we want to invest in you.
Hmm.
So again, it's this question of alignment. We're not trying to take money from you. Yes, you have to pay for the workshop, but at the moment we give founders like a 60% discount.
Yeah.
Um, so you, it's about learning about it, and the founders who come through, a lot of them just come to one. They come to like the investment valuation workshop, and then they go, "Oh, there's all these things that you've referred to that I hadn't even thought of,"
Hmm.
and that's the point of the workshop. Uh, and so then they come to others. So it's a series of four full day workshops, one half day workshop. They're typically hosted by Melbourne Angels. So if you want to know about them, just go to the Melbourne Angels website, which is melbourneangels.com, and register for the newsletter. We don't actually have a newsletter at the moment, although I think we've got it coming out again. But you'll get infrequent emails, maybe one a month, telling you about our networking lunch in Melbourne, which is the longest running sort of startup networking lunch in the country. Uh, or or you'll get an email telling you that the workshops are coming and how to book for those. Uh,
And are the workshops in person or do they have digital?
at the moment, they're in person for a lot of reasons. It's a full day workshop.
Yeah,
So if you've ever tried sitting online in your living room or wherever, attending a full day workshop or conference or something, you'll realize you spent most of the time paying no attention at all.
it's
Uh,
exhausting. Mm.
and it's not a good modality for this. And you don't get to interact with the other people in the room. I mean, a lot of the value comes in the break when you're talking to everybody else. But they are workshops. And what I mean by that is it's not a lecture. People ask questions, and questions get dealt with. And that often means we go off on tangents. But if people are asking, they need to know. And so that's the whole point of doing it that way. Um, so yeah, that's it's there will be. I'm working on a way to sort of put it all into an on-demand online system.
Yeah.
But how you take a live interactive process and make it a canned on-demand one is something I'm still figuring out.
And it is about building relationships as well, which is when you do on demand, it tends to only be one way. So thank you so much that you've been extremely generous with your time. We're what, 1 hour and 45 minutes in. We do like to finish off these sessions with something just a little bit fun. We're not going to go deep into it, but I had two ideas. The AI idea of the day, where I thought I knew which one you'd select before this interview, but now and some of the things we talked about, I'm not sure which one you go through. Which one sounds most appealing to you in terms of wanting to learn more about? One is the Founder's Sense test, which is essentially a business and idea validation tool that they can submit their ideas and their P&L statements and so forth, and it gives them a yep, go for it or dump it score, and so that and maybe some suggestions on how they can improve on their idea or business direction. The other one was about a robot dog walker, and I'll even add in clipper on that as well. Which one of those automatically captures your interest?
Uh, well, I'd say the second one,
Yeah.
and I'll tell you why very quickly. The problem with the first one is I'm not yet convinced that there is going to be the ability to train some sort of expert system to respond to the founder's proposition without all the inherent bias that we see in all the large language model systems. So
Mhm.
I worry that that automated system, that AI system, is going to be giving founders the wrong answer. Um, you can do it today. You can take your idea model and throw it up against a large language model and say, will this succeed? And they'll give you a very convincing sounding answer. And often the good ones, more Gemini than OpenAI, for instance, will give you good sourcing of where they're getting the answer from. But there is so much that requires the background knowledge of the person giving you the answer, the intuitive leaps of the pattern matching that doesn't happen inside a structured computer process,
The subtle nuances, I think you said earlier on.
which are not. One day we will have AI systems that can do all of that. We're just not there yet.
Hmm.
So I would worry about. So one of the things I teach everybody, if the investors, is that in theory, in practice, we want to make money. But in theory, everything that you invest, actually not even in theory, in practice, everything that you invest in startups, you need to be able to afford to lose. You don't plan to lose it all, but you need to be able to afford to lose it because that's what the odds say is going to happen.
Hmm.
And you need to not take aggressive terms to try and protect against that loss because while you can afford to lose that money, you're expecting that the founder or the founders are actually, it's their livelihood. They're putting their life on the line for the success of this business. Now, that is the level, right? So when you get a founder, you asked earlier about flags, when you get a founder who said, this is one of my three side hustles, I have my day job, I want to put money into this. And we say, okay, so you're going to quit your job, shut down those other side hustles and come do this full time. Oh, no, 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 I'm not going to do that. Well, that's not really an alignment of interests and risk, right? So investors need to be very wary of the impact that they can have on the livelihoods of the founders. And equally, the founders need to be very respectful of the fact that, particularly with angel investors, this is their money that they worked hard to get. It's almost never someone who's inherited millions of dollars. It's someone who's had their own success in their professional or business life. And they could spend it on their kids, go on a holiday. These days, they can even leave it in the bank and get interest on it. For a
Hmm.
good decade there, that wasn't an option. Um, so don't think about investors as, oh, you have an obligation to invest. You must invest. No, we're under no obligation. Fund managers are under an obligation to put their money to work. They have a contract and a time limit. So the whole
Hmm.
clock ticking on that. But private investors and angel investors, that's not the case. So it's about this mutual consideration for people because that is at the core of how you get to success. So those are all related reasons why that first one that you proposed raises alarm bells for me. The second one, I don't think we're necessarily there in some ways, but you can have a dog walking robot today. You can go
Yeah,
and
but
get,
could it drive a hovercraft while doing it? That'd be
no.
pretty. That would be pretty cool. I think that's when I know technology's hit that next level, and I can go, Jordan, look, a dog walker on a hovercraft that's robotic, walking dogs. That's cool. Jordan, thanks so much for your time today. I really do appreciate it. I knew when we started this call that I could talk to you for days. And I think we've proven that, just scratching the surface there a little bit. I hope you enjoyed yourself today as well.
Thank you very much, Sean. I did. I hope that you're able to edit this into something that your listeners will enjoy. And if you want to do it again in the future, we can always make another date.
Definitely take you up on that. Thanks everyone for joining us today on Unicorn Ventures podcast. And we look forward to seeing you on the next edition. All the best. Bye.